Hello, welcome back to learning how to complete the square in algebra. Same exact process we are going to use in these problems as in all of the past ones, but these problems will be slightly more complex, mostly because we'll have to work with fractions along the way as part of the problem, and you'll see what I mean when we get there. And so what I say when we always start teaching anybody algebra from the beginning is I say you really need to master fractions, because when fractions pop up in problems, they make the problem harder than it really needs to be if you don't understand how to deal with fractions. So let's get there when we get there, but we'll be doing some fraction work along the way. So for the first part, or for the first problem, what if we have 2 times t squared plus 4 times t plus 1 equals 0? So far it looks the same. Notice there's no fractions really in this at all. So we follow the same process. We take the constant term and we move it to the right-hand side. So that's going to leave us with 2t squared plus 4t is equal to negative 1. So the next thing we do is we have to take a look at what is in front of the t squared term, and in this case it's a coefficient of 2. Now for all of these problems you have to make sure the coefficient in front of the t squared is a 1. In all of the previous problems it has already been a 1, so we never had to do anything. But now that we have something other than 1 there, we have to get rid of it. And the way we get rid of it, or make it go away, is we divide the left-hand side and the right-hand side by the 2, which will then basically cancel. So in order to write it out fully, I'm going to write the whole thing explicitly. So it'll be 2t squared plus 4t equals negative 1. Just rewrite the equation. I'm going to divide the left-hand side by 2, and I'll divide the right-hand side by 2. Some books will kind of skip the step a little bit and just start canceling things. But really, I want you to see you're dividing the left-hand and the right-hand side by the 2. Now, the next thing that we're going to do might look a little odd to you at first, but let me write it down and show you. I'm going to take this and simplify it as follows. I'm going to break this term up into 2t squared over 2 plus comes from the plus sign here, 4 times t over 2, and that's still equal to negative 1/2. Now, why does this work? Basically, you can break this thing apart like this because you can think of it as if you were going backwards, what would happen? If I were adding these fractions here, you would say, well, first I need a common denominator, and I already have a common denominator, so the common denominator of the answer is a 2. Once that's done, you add the numerators, 2t squared plus 4t, which is what I have right here. So this breaking apart business is exactly the opposite of just adding some fractions together. So anytime on a large fraction you have two terms added together or subtracted, you can break them apart over the same denominator because it's the reverse of just adding them. All right, so now I have it in this form. Why am I doing that? Because now the 2 divided by 2 is 1. I'm still going to have the t squared left over. The 4 divided by 2 is 2. I'm still going to have this t left over. And on the right, I'm going to have a negative 1/2. So this is what we end up with once we move the constant term to the right, divide by the leading term of the coefficient. So now the leading coefficient is 1, which is what we have to have. But in the process of doing that, we have a fraction that has snuck into our problem that wasn't there to begin with. And that's why I said we're going to have to deal with some fractions. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to write down the equation again. T squared plus 2t equals negative 1/2. Just write the equation down again. And what we're going to have to do is take a look at this coefficient, which is a 2 in front of the t term, and we're going to add that coefficient divided by 2, and we're going to have to take whatever we get from that and square it. We have to add that constant term to both sides of the equation. Notice I add the exact same thing to both sides, right? So we take the coefficient, divide by 2, square it. Exact same thing that we've always been doing up until this point. And I know that you know that 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 1 squared is also 1. So really what we have is t squared plus 2t plus the number 1 equals negative 1/2 plus the number 1. So on the left-hand side, we have t squared